Managing a team of investigators just got easier with TrackOps, the all-in-one case management software. Are you ready to enhance case flows and drive efficiency? TrackOps offers powerful management and coordination tools to streamline workflows and communication, all designed to keep your team synchronized and focused on the task at hand. With TrackOps, you can easily distribute workloads, track individual performance, and ensure deadlines are met. Plus, the TrackOps mobile app allows investigators to access case activities on the go. And the TrackOps video app allows for simple and consistent timestamping, all included at no extra cost. Start streamlining your investigation process today. Visit trackops.com for a free 15-day trial and experience the power of efficient team management. TrackOps, empowering teams, simplifying management. The Campbell Group has teamed up with PI Perspectives to offer listeners top-notch, affordable insurance solutions. Private investigators can get insurance for their business for as low as $305 per year. Apply now at piperspectivesinsurance.com and receive a quote back within 24 hours. Do you enjoy our podcast and the guests we bring you? Since 2019, Matt and his team have done their very best to give you amazing shows each week. If you feel like our show has helped you to be a better investigator, or maybe even inspired you to become an investigator, please let us know. We're looking for testimonials. Drop Matt an email with a recorded 20 to 30 seconds of you talking about this podcast. You can also email him something verbal about the website. His email is matthews@satellitepi.com. And if you really feel blessed for having this content, consider supporting Matt and our show by joining Investigators Toolbox. You really have to see version 2.0. And at just 49 cents a day, it's a no-brainer. Now let's jump in to this week's episode. Welcome to this week's episode. We're back with a new show as we celebrate the 4th of July this week. Please take some time and remember what makes this country great. Don't forget the sunblock and try not to eat too much. Today we welcome a legendary private investigator since 1960. Yes, folks, 1960. That's even before my time. This investigator has been solving cases and gathering intelligence. He's a real Sherlock Holmes, and he has some amazing stories to share in his book, Dangerous Escapades. We're so pleased to welcome Ian Withers. This great episode covers so many details of an amazing career. So let's welcome Ian and your host, private investigator Matt Spaier.
And welcome everyone to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spaier, your host. Today I have a huge honor, to interview an investigator who's seen a thing or two, been around for a couple of years. I'm hoping maybe in the next year or two he can really establish himself in the field here, because I don't think he's done enough. So we're here welcoming our friend Ian Withers to the program. Ian, welcome to the program.
Thank you and good afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, so great to have you. If you are part of any of the national associations, Telnet and whatnot, you know the name, right? So Ian, for those who don't know who you are, give me a little bit about your background and what you do.
Well, now I'm semi-retired, thank goodness. And when I say semi-retired, I really mean semi-demi-retired. Mm-hmm. I still do a little bit. But I started a couple of years ago in 1960, about October. And my first taste of intelligence or investigative work was with the British Army. I was in the Territorial Army, and I happened to be assigned to a unit that dealt with intelligence gathering, which the interest. Later on in life, following a building business, which was the family business for a few generations, we had a defaulting client. I got selected by my immediate family to go and hunt down the defaulting client and squeeze some money out of him.
Right.
I found that much more enjoyable than looking after building contracts and church work.
Sure.
So as a result of that, and just to finish that story, I did find him. He hadn't got any money. He was bankrupt, and I ended up with my brother taking him out for lunch because he was in a a pretty upset condition. But that was the end of my business in that direction. So I then managed to find a job as a trainee investigator for a private investigation agency in London. And that's where it all started. I got my teeth into the business.
Yeah.
I was there for a few years and then joined the Surrey police, which at that time was offering a police house. I was young, married, had a child, and the police house was very attractive. So I became a village policeman in Surrey. And it was a wonderful 2+ years out in the sticks, ending up as a motorcycle rider, divisional motorcyclist. Absolutely enjoyed it.
Right.
But my old boss then came back and hunted me down and made me an offer, as they say, that I couldn't say no to.
Sure. And the rest is history, right? That's
basically it. I then did 2 years as a commercial investigation manager, dealing with commercial investigations, and then broke away after that contract was finished. And together with my brother, we built a business which was built on a bit of publicity, a lot of luck, and a little bit of notoriety.
Yeah.
Days before computers, before mobile phones, in fact, before dials on the telephones. In those days, we had to pick the phone up and wait for the operator to come on and say, "Number, please." It seems a long time ago now how we managed on.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen a thing or two over the years, right? That's
well, I've been very lucky. I've been fortunate enough to get involved in some very high-profile cases, some very big cases, certainly some high-risk cases,
right,
and managed to survive them.
Yeah,
that's the main part of it, is to survive these situations. And I think at the end of the day, the vast majority of us, no matter what we do in the investigative profession, it's all about challenge.
Sure.
But it comes along with a problem. We are perceived to be the problem solver. They've been to the police, can't get anywhere. Their lawyers can't get anywhere. For one reason or another, they end up coming to the PI.
Right.
We are the problem solver, and that is the challenge. And achieving a result is a tremendous satisfaction. Getting paid for it, even more so.
Even better, right? That's
absolutely
so true. So
absolutely
true. So, I mean, over the years, you've obviously been doing this for so long. Seeing things implemented and change drastically. You start talking about picking up the phone and saying, "Operator, can you help me connect the call?" To having cell phones with GPS tracking and whatnot, and being able to pinpoint people where they're at, and it's incredible to see what has done. I mean, for me, it's the whole GPS traveling, right? Being able to get to a location, having a map on your phone, whereas it used to be you would have a paper map to try and figure out where to get, right? So
absolutely
that's there. And I think the implementation of being able to work on your own as opposed to having as much support staff. I feel like back in the day, you would need to have certain people to do certain tasks because you weren't able to do them on your little mobile computer, doing all these things. So, seeing that stuff is pretty incredible. What would you say is your time doing all this work, the most helpful piece of technology that came about to help you do your task?
Well, undoubtedly the laptop, absolutely
Right.
invaluable. You can carry it with you. You can access data resources worldwide. You can go on an inquiry and you can sit outside a property, and if you can get a connection, which you normally can in most places, you can actually access information about the property and the occupants before you knock on the door. Even
Right.
in the most simple job, such as a process serve, when you go to the door, if you're trying to serve an individual, it's so valuable to be able to sit outside and see who's actually listed as resident at the address.
Sure.
Particularly if you've got a father-son situation with the same name, and you get the dates of birth from your database. So when you see the younger one and he says, "No, that's my father," you know that he's lying because you've seen the date of birth and you know
Sure.
who you're looking for.
Right.
That is the most fantastic piece of equipment to have. But of course, there's many more. All the electronics that have grown up in the system, going right the way back to telephone taps.
Right.
And of course, one must also keep in mind with all of this type of equipment, the use of it has now become controlled. We have this new industry, a brand new industry called compliance. It
Yeah.
never existed back in the 60s and the 70s. Compliance is now a profession on its own, and we all have to learn, as well as being PIs, how to be compliant.
Yeah.
How to be compliant with how we do our job, how we access the purposes for which we do things, and what we do with the results.
Yeah.
Which we have to handle in a responsible way. Otherwise, we end up being non-compliant, and suddenly you can be an investigator one day and a criminal the next.
Scary. Yeah, it's definitely scary. I think compliance back in the 60s was probably the guy who shows up at your door and buys you a sandwich instead of breaking your knuckles for owing some money, right?
That really is about it. Now, in the States, of course, you had licensing. We never had, we still don't have licensing in the UK. Unbelievable. You still do not have licensing. But to give an example of the difficulties in compliance terms, I'm based in Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom. We don't have licensing. 100 miles down the road, or 50 miles down the road, we have the Irish border, and that becomes the Republic of Ireland. There is no border as such. You just drive through. You wouldn't even know, to be frank, on the road.
Right.
You're in the north of Ireland, UK, or the Republic of Ireland. Once you've crossed that line, you require a license. And they criminalize those that don't have a license that conduct investigative activities.
Yeah.
So you can quite easily just follow somebody and end up becoming a criminal when you cross the line. And these are the kind of traps that you have to be so careful about.
Yeah, I mean, listen, in the U.S., we have reciprocity and those issues of going states. We don't really have that issue going into countries, unless you're on the border of Canada or on the border of Mexico, right? So I can only imagine, being in the UK and dealing with that. And I've had some exposure with that through my friends at Conflict International who do a lot of that stuff as well.
Yes.
And I know recently they had the whole process of going through and getting their license in Ireland, and I know it was not an easy task. There was a lot of requests for additional documentation and things that you had to provide. So it is a bit of a challenge to go from non-licensed to a licensed country for sure.
Indeed. And if you spread that a little further, you can see that when you're undertaking international investigations, that as life has gone on and we've come now into the 2020s, you need licensing and regulation across most of the world.
Yeah.
So you can become a criminal very easily if you start to go and work in another European state that requires licensing and you don't have a license. There's no such thing as reciprocity here.
Yeah.
You're on your own. So we're forced to engage other agencies or go work with other agencies in order to be compliant.
Yeah, and the worst thing you want to do is have something that you discover to make your case and not have it unactionable, because you obtain that in a way that's not going to be usable, right?
No, precisely. This is the issue. If you obtain information and that information has been obtained contrary to some regulation, then it can be challenged in court and be, in some jurisdictions, it can be deemed illegal and not accepted. In England, we still have a little bit of tolerance where the courts themselves can decide whether evidence, even if obtained illegally, is still permitted to be used in the case.
Yeah.
But it may ultimately affect the way the costs are divided out.
Right. And then you better hope your insurance premiums are paid up. if you
Boy, yes.
And then we come after you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. It's definitely been a challenge, I'm sure, to see how it's developed and things have changed over the years to do that. So, like, back when you started, what would you say would be the most popular item that an investigator was called for, utilized for, back when you got started?
Yes, well, even then, of course, there were specialized investigators, but in the general run, and in those days, we were referred to as inquiry agents.
Okay.
That's how the law, the legal system referred to as inquiry agents. And fundamentally, in the 60s, 70s, the most important work from the perspective of income were the matrimonial inquiries, domestics.
Okay.
Cases. And of course, one has to keep in mind that right up until the late 70s, early 80s, the law required evidence of infidelity or adultery, and that involved proving to the court that a sexual act had taken place.
Right.
And you could no longer, you couldn't stand outside the hotel and report back. A and B went into the hotel room and come out 4 hours later. That wasn't good enough for the court. They needed evidence of an actual sexual act. So
Right.
the days where we used to force hotel doors or make pretext knocks on the door as room service and take photographs of people lying in bed. And then when you went to court and gave your evidence, the judge would criticize you for having gone about it in the way that you did. And
Right.
yet that was what the law required. So you were in, whichever way you went, you were the bad man.
Yeah.
And that, along with locate cases, you call them locates, we call them traces, trace cases, repossession of goods. In other words, asset-related goods concerned with debt or default. That was the bread and butter. And then now and again, you got something more juicy that came along. And in those days, the media were big clients.
Yeah.
Most of us in the PI business earned a lot of bread and butter from the media, tracking down people for them to write stories about, finding out who was sleeping with who, all for the newspaper tits for bits. And this kind of thing was really every day.
Yeah.
Slowly, as life went on, the industry found out that we were around and we could help, and you ended up dealing with insurance cases. And fundamentally, 24 hours a day was never enough.
Right.
So we had to think about, how do we expand? And our profession is one of the hardest business to actually be able to expand, as you probably well know.
Yeah, it's difficult for sure.
If you get a good man, he ends up being a good friend when he's with you and a good competitor later on.
Yeah.
The way that he works, and to be able to accept that.
Yeah. That's why you keep in the family, right, Ian?
Really important, yeah. Way back in the 60s, we had to expand. We were just so busy and so much pressure coming in. And of course, we were young and we were greedy, and those challenges were ever more demanding.
Yeah.
We've taken on, for example, retail security services. We provided store detectives around London, the West End, Chelsea, some provincial towns. At one time, I think almost 55 girls working for us as store detectives. We were dealing with arrests, and then the problems that went along with what was basically common law arrest, where the police would not accept a charge for one reason or another, and you ended up at risk, and your employer, the shopkeeper, the store, were at risk of being sued for an unlawful arrest. So we had to take those things into court ourselves and take our chances on fighting them.
Sure.
This was time demanding. So my brother and I, we were together in business at that time. We decided to expand the business by franchising. And so we entered into the world of franchising, and we started to franchise our business, which was a replicable business. It could be repeated quite easily. All you needed was the people, and the best people, police officers that were leaving the job with a lump sum pension, military leaving the services with a lump sum pension. They even took us on board and started to allow us to provide training in advance to soldiers that were going to leave the army in the next 12 months.
Wow.
And then we would take a franchise in an area. And we opted for fixed fee franchises so that we didn't have to police the franchise.
Sure.
When you take a percentage, you never know if a cash customer comes in. And believe me, ex-policemen are quite happy to look after the cash customers. So we had to find a way that we didn't have to spend our time watching those that were working the franchise.
Have to do surveillance on your own people.
Well, it was ridiculous. That was the kind of situation that you had.
Wow.
You know, a client would complain about a job and you had no record of it.
Wow.
Oh, what's happened? So we found a simple answer, and that was fixed fees.
Yeah.
So in those days, they paid £500 a month for a license, and we got up to 16 franchises around the country.
Amazing.
And they did all the local work in their local area. We provided the backup. If they had something they didn't know how to deal with, or something that was too big, they could transfer it to us. If they needed equipment, we would supply it. They need extra labor, we would get them in from other franchises and divert them. And we built the business over years.
You must have been like the first investigators to franchise out a brand. That's pretty amazing.
Well, I don't think we were the first. I think you guys can claim that. Your famous Pinkertons, I think, were franchised
Oh, okay, right,
in
yeah.
the 20th century.
All right, so you stole the model, man. Okay.
And even Pinkertons originated from a Scotsman, so
Right.
there we are. It's in the blood of the Brits, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, shame on me for not
Landed.
knowing the history there, but yeah, Pinkerton. I mean, you obviously, most of us know Pinkertons who they were, but I didn't realize that was a franchise situation too. That's very interesting.
It was the basis of a franchise.
Right.
Yes, where they had offices that were self-determined.
Right. Very amazing. Okay, so we're gonna take a quick break, and when I come back, or we come back here, I want to talk further about just the history here, what we have going on. We want to talk about a book you've written called Dangerous Escapades, that I'm sure has got some tales in there of your investigative techniques and stories over the years. So we're going to dive more into that when we get back. So everybody sit tight, and we will be right back.
After 4 years of development, Scope Now is proud to announce the release of Grid. Grid combines OSINT with real-time physical data to achieve new levels of intelligence gathering. Grid supports over 50 data types and hundreds of thousands of sources. Upgrade your OSINT capabilities with Grid and elevate your intelligence team today at scopenow.com. Check out the PI Institute of Education at piinstitute.com. Since 1989, Kelly Riddle has been teaching on subjects such as surveillance, nursing home investigations, insurance fraud, domestic investigations, hidden assets, and accident scene investigations. The PI Institute of Education is a featured learning partner in the investigatorstoolbox.com. So check out the free content on the site, then visit the Institute for more great savings on additional classes. Are you drowning in fees with your current provider? IRB Search offers the highest quality data at the most competitive prices. Founded by investigators for investigators, IRB is tailored specifically toward helping you close your cases. We're currently offering PI Perspective listeners an exclusive 30-day free trial of our system. So simply go to irbsearch.com and apply using the promo code PIP30 to claim this promotion. Satellite Investigations has launched its new website full of great new content. Matt and his team have released some great, informative blogs. Make sure you log into LinkedIn and follow Satellite Investigations for the latest content.
And welcome back to PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spaier, your host. We're here with Ian Withers. Ian's from Priority Investigations in Belfast, and apparently he's been a private investigator for a while. So, Ian, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So like before we took our break, we were talking about this whole franchising and building out a brand of different investigators and some of the challenges that you had trying to manage all that. And just such an interesting model. So where did all that lead up to? I mean, is it still going on today? I would assume probably not, right?
No, it's life has a funny way of dealing with it. Yes. Right. The franchises were swinging. My brother and I had a falling out. We were brothers in business. We were highly competitive.
Right.
And we had two different ways of dealing with the job. And I wouldn't be saying anything out of order. My brother, he liked to be in the office and run things as a manager, and he was an excellent manager. I like to be out in the field and running things from the front. And so it just didn't work out. So we agreed over quite a time that we would split the business, and he broke away and continued the business under the original founded name of Nationwide Investigations.
Mm-hmm.
He made an absolute success and continued the franchising. Unfortunately, he died about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And his franchises run right up to the point of death. He created the PI Academy, which provided training services to government level qualifications, MVQ, which we have in the UK and Ireland and in Commonwealth countries, National Vocational Certificate, which
right.
is deemed almost equivalent to a low level degree. And I, on the other hand, rebranded the business as Priority and dealt with my business my way, and we become friendly competitors.
Right.
We were friends all over the years, and we ended up working together on cases.
That's great.
In my case, I took 8 franchises, he took 8. My 8 franchises operated right up until 1979, when along came a great big job. And that is a job which is explained in the book. And given today's circumstances, it's interesting because it was a foreign government.
Okay, so yeah, so let's dig into that. So Dangerous Escapades. Let's talk a little bit about this story and what's in there.
Escapades is a book which actually runs through the chronological sequence of my working life up to this point where Seychelles, the government of Seychelles, decided to engage me. And from starting off dealing with surveillance, I ended up being offered a position directly working for them as National Security Advisor, which I did for just on 7 years. And as a result of that, of course, the franchises became a bit of a problem because I was no longer really able to provide the backup services that they needed and they were entitled to for under the franchise agreement.
Right.
So I ended up selling the franchise to the franchisee. So at one end, they bought the franchise from me. They operated the franchise. It was a 5-year deal. Then they renewed. Some didn't, but most did. And I then offered them to buy their franchise back. So they bought back their franchise. We agreed fees, and they took over their businesses. Some of those businesses are still running today as independent private investigation companies.
Wow.
Others I later, after Seychelles had finished, I actually bought back 2 of the franchises again and continued running them till I went into my, I think, 3rd or 4th retirement. I can't quite remember. Quite a few times. Hard to retire from this business. So
right.
There is no remission.
We never retire. That's all I can tell people getting into the business. There is no retirement. You're a lifer.
The interesting aspect about that we're talking about 1979, and Seychelles government engaged me. I went to my lawyer, my solicitor, to seek advice as to whether I could work for a foreign government in the law of the United Kingdom. And I ended up getting not only an approval to work, but I had a direct link to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office here and provided a conduit between them and the president of the country that I was working for.
Amazing.
Which was quite useful in many ways, which I explained in the book.
Yeah, get the book, people. Buy the book and figure it out.
Years before that, of course, I ended up working for the government of South Africa, the old government of South Africa, which caused a bit of furore in due course when, of course, apartheid was actually a horrible thing. But my role was to try and prevent bombs being exploded in South Africa. So I didn't quite say it the same way.
Yeah.
But
it was so turbulent. I mean, you remember in the 80s, the whole like Sun City thing, it was a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. It was pretty good stuff. From an investigator's point of view, it was exciting work, it was challenging work, and of course it was very rewarding if you managed to divert a bunch of explosives from doing its dirty work.
Yeah.
Of course, the overall or the bigger picture didn't come into the thinking at the time. You were looking at a particular job, particular challenge, and the politics of it, i.e. whether or not apartheid was good or bad, didn't actually cross your mind, nor did it cross the mind of the British government at that time.
Right.
It was only as time went on and things came to a head, and eventually, of course, apartheid was finished, and the country is now free of apartheid.
Right.
But I'm afraid it's really not that much better off, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Or in social terms.
Right. Best intentions always are the motives, but you can't control the outcome.
Very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And then as life went on, we ended up again working for the media throughout all of this time, and some of the newspapers that we worked for were engaged on things in Ireland. I lived in Ireland. We had the major part of the so-called Troubles from the time I set up an office in Belfast in about 1971, I think, or 72, right at the heart of the Northern Irish Troubles. So we were involved in tracking down people that had escaped from jail. We had a situation called the Maze Escape, and lots of IRA prisoners escaped. One of my roles was to try and track them down so the newspapers could go and interview them. And of course, as it's explained in the book, one of them was turned out to be Britain's most wanted terrorist. And I was able to track him down with a pretext phone call.
Wow.
The Irish government were unable to find him, and we were engaged by the Attorney General of the United Kingdom through the Sunday Times newspaper. And we tracked him down. It became a front page story in the United Kingdom and worldwide.
Wow.
So they're fairly heavy duty jobs.
Yeah, I would say it's a little heavy duty. So
in about 1974, the provisional IRA blew up my office. I was in a shared office, and we got burnt out, blown up. Luckily, nobody was killed. Just one police officer was marginally injured. And these are the kind of things that we had to deal with at the same time as dealing with the job.
Yeah.
And then put another angle on that. You then had insurance companies that wanted you to go out and to do compensation investigations and film people that were making claims in the worst parts of Northern Ireland, in Belfast,
right,
where to go out on the street with a camera made you a bit of a target to start walking around.
I would say so.
Like,
that's pickings, right?
Absolutely. We had to find a way of dealing with it. So we bought a ginormous camera that you sat on your shoulder, and took one girl with a clipboard and one cameraman, and we would go to where the surveillance was and pretend to be interviewing people about the troubles, but secretly recording the individual in his house that was our target.
Wow.
So we managed to overcome the problems.
Right.
Yes.
Amazing, right? All that, and you got to film people that are shagging too, right? So it's a little bit of everything. That's crazy. Absolutely crazy. So what would you say, like, what brought you back in after your first retirement?
Well, it's interesting. My first retirement really was Seychelles.
Yeah.
I did 6 years in Seychelles, and towards the end of my contract, the main opposition leader, the person who, for the preceding 7 years, my organization had been following and monitoring and finding out what he was up to. And I should mention that he did actually organize a mercenary attack into Seychelles, where a small military force led by Mad Mike Hall of Congo mercenary fame, or the Mad Geese film, if anyone knows that, attacked the island. There was a shoot-up, there was an aircraft hijack, there were people killed, people injured. It was serious stuff.
Wow.
My job was to follow and watch him. In late 1985, he was murdered in London. Fortunately for me, I was in the Seychelles at the time, so I couldn't be accused of being the murderer, but I have been accused of being a conspirator, i.e. the police think that I had knowledge of the murder before it happened, which I can assure you I did not.
Right.
They believe it was the president of Seychelles who was responsible. I'm completely unaware of that. I don't believe it, but then I'm open-minded given the elapsed time and other evidence which has come in. But certainly that was the situation. So when that happened, I was in the Seychelles. I had the choice to go back, get arrested under what was then our Anti-Terrorism Act, locked up for a period of time without access to lawyers. Hard to believe in a modern society that that could happen, but that's what happened. Wow. So my lawyer offered me up by appointment. They didn't want to interview me. We invited them to come to Seychelles to interview me. They didn't wish to do that. So I continued to stay in Seychelles for more than one reason. One, I had young children or younger children. I didn't want to leave them in a position where I couldn't finish their education.
Right.
Secondly, Seychelles at that time owed me a lot of money. If I'd have left, the chance of getting it become very much less. So I needed to stay there to make sure that I got paid. And they eventually offered me 50% of what they owed me in the local currency, which was no good back home. So I decided it was a paradise island. It seemed perfect. My family loved it. My wife loved it. The kids loved it.
Right.
We all went. We lived in Seychelles. So in order to make a living, I retired and bought a house with my collection of money from the Seychelles in rupees. Bought a restaurant and ran a restaurant for 4 or 5 years on the island, and ran a pirate boat doing booze cruises.
Nice.
A schooner, about 90-foot schooner, carried 90 passengers. So quite a big job. And an air conditioning company. I imported ice cream machines from Chicago and put them around the island. They're still there today.
Wow.
So the ice cream on a little coral island in the middle of nowhere has an American ice cream machine, which I installed way back in the 1980s.
All right. You gotta have a chuckle about that, right? They only knew.
There came a problem, of course, and that was in 1992. The government decided to reintroduce democracy, and that meant all the people that I had been watching that all blamed me for the death of their leader were coming home.
Wow.
So my position became untenable, as they say, and the president invited me up for a coffee, gave me the good news, and suggested that I might want to leave.
Right, send you on your way.
So my wife and one son. No, my wife left immediately within 2 days. And one son was in South Africa doing diving. He now runs a business, but he was learning diving at that time. So he went back eventually to Ireland. And my youngest son, he'd fallen in love with a local girl. So he stayed on with me for another few months while I tried to cash in my businesses and get the money out. And we resettled in Ireland, and I picked up my business again, started really from scratch, and rebuilt it.
That is amazing. That is totally amazing. When you're talking about sons and everything like that, I had the opportunity to meet one of your sons in New Orleans last year. And I remember I had gotten an assignment from one of my buddies. They're like, you got to find John Withers. I said, okay, who's John Withers? Like, okay, I know Ian. Who's John? And what does he look like? They're like, oh no, you just got to find him and say hello. And it was a conference with like 500 people. And the crack investigator that I am, it took me about 10 minutes. And I'm like, you're John Withers. And he said, yes, I am. And we just had a great time hanging out, and getting to know him, and what he does is great. So what does that feel like, having a legacy here, having a son that's kind of in the business and doing things? How do you feel about all that?
Absolutely brilliant. It's marvelous. And they've lived the business all their lives, so it was relatively easy. But as these things are, when lads get to 16 or 17, the last thing they actually want to do is what their father does.
Right.
So he went off on his own adventures, ending up in Antarctica as a safety diver for the British Antarctic Survey Team.
Yes, yeah, he did. Tell me that. Yeah.
After 10 years, he became base commander, responsible for the lives of over 200 people in probably one of the most difficult areas of the world to be. Had some amazing adventures, and was honoured by Her Majesty at the time with the Polar Medal, which meant that we all had the privilege of going to Buckingham Palace, my wife and I, Johnny and his wife, as going into Buckingham Palace and being present for the award and meeting Prince Charles, now King Charles.
King Charles,
so, an amazing honour. And what a delightful person he is as an individual, with that experience, to be able to go on into this business. And he takes it absolutely seriously and lives it much like I did.
Yes, we're talking about John, not King Charles.
Precisely.
Yeah. And he's great, John. I mean, really, we hit it off, man. As soon as I met him, it was like we were mates for a long time, and just being able to laugh about things, and he definitely has a grasp of the industry, and what a good friendship that was forged there. You did a good job with that one. He's okay. I think he's gonna be all right.
No, he's a good man.
Yeah. Wow. Like Ian, it's crazy because I've known you for a while. Like, we've seen each other over at conferences, but I've never really gotten these stories out of you. It's always yeah, we're at a conference, we're chatting, but we're not really digging into. And I think you don't go and advertise all this stuff, and shame on me, because Harry Gold told me years ago, she's like, you need to get Ian on your podcast. You need to do it. And I'm like, yeah, okay. It's like Harry always has a comment about something, right? And
She's a great girl.
yeah, yeah,
Great girl.
she's awesome. Harriet's the best. And then, I saw you in Tampa earlier, and I was like, yeah, we should do this. But then it didn't really do it. It didn't follow up and whatever. So I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to get your story in a different medium, right? You got it in the book, but at least you got here now on the podcast to kind of talk about this stuff. So Dangerous Escapades is the name of the book. I mean, I'm sure those stories are in that book, right? You're talking about the legacy of your career. You're not kidding. I would definitely go pick up and read this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. For those that have come across the first book, just to explain that, the first book was Private Eye, Secret Spy, which I wrote during the first period of the COVID, and I couldn't get a publisher. They were all overloaded with people that had been in COVID. And
right, yeah. Everyone's going to write a book, yeah.
Love nor money. So I self-published it, and it sold very well. It's sold over 40,000 units now.
Awesome.
Between the soft cover and the audio book. And I then got a publisher that came in who has re-edited it, tidied it up, given it a different title to what he believes makes it more commercially saleable. Hence, it's now got a new name and a slightly different edited version, which is Dangerous Adventures. Yeah. So that's the reasoning for that. But okay. Just to come back to the fact that I'm fairly quiet about these things at conferences, you mustn't forget I am British, so I'm reserved.
There you go. That's the excuse. We just got to get him, at 3:00, maybe he's having some tea, and he'll spill the tea, maybe. So this was great. Thank you so much, Ian, for making yourself available to chat about this. I think it's so important for the younger generation to understand, that folks that have been doing this for a while, like what it was like back then, and really things that are easy for us today. Like you couldn't even imagine how to accomplish a task in 1965, or 1973, as opposed to 2023, and what the difference is. Obviously there's pluses and minuses to both, but just being able to appreciate how the community has evolved into what it is today, and you're a big part of that. So I want to thank you for putting in all the time that you put in, and having the ethical standards that you've had, and the stories that you have. It's inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you very much. A real pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to have the links to the books in the show notes. So if you're interested in checking it out, just go on to the show notes and you'll get all that stuff. And Ian, thank you so much for coming on and being part of the program.
My pleasure, Matt. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next time on the next episode. Take care.
Thanks for checking out the show. Ian is a true legend and someone Matt has wanted to feature for a long time. You can find links to his books in the show notes. We'd like to thank Campbell Insurance Group for sponsoring our podcast. Remember to tell them you listen to save $50 when you apply for insurance. Additional thanks to TrackOps, ScopeNow, IRB, and PI Institute for Education for sponsoring our podcast. Also, don't forget about investigatorstoolbox.com, where you can type in Perspectives 50 to save $50 when you join up. Please also follow Matt at Satellite Investigations on LinkedIn. If you have a question or a comment about the show, email Matt at matthews@satellitepi.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. We'd like your feedback to bring you the best shows possible, and we'll be back next week with a new show. So make sure you tune in and stay safe out there.